Hi, Hebrew Hearts family. We're back. Welcome. I'm Daniel Bertels, and this is Jamie Valenzuela, and we're continuing on with our story a little bit. And want to recap. I think the biggest moral of the story from our last video is we spend so much time ordering our own steps that we don't let the Father order our steps. And we have all these criteria for what the right man is, what the right woman is, and we leave no room for the Father to move. And that's really not how we're supposed to be walking. We're supposed to be walking in faith. And so we just want to remind you of that as we go through these things. And if you haven't seen the first video, we recommend you do that. It will really show you how the Father has intervened. But now we're going to go back and kind of do some backtracking a little bit. Jamie's going to tell a little bit about her story and where she was when the Father called me to intervene in her life. And we'll carry on from there.
Well, in the first video, I talked about how Daniel came to my neighborhood. He came to Houston, unbeknownst to me and without my permission. I told him no, that I didn't want to see him, and he came anyway. And he walked around my neighborhood 8 times. And when I first learned that he did, it was, at the time, I thought it was just to help me walk through some healing. But after that, I had been praying one day, and the Father showed me a vision where I learned that Daniel, when he walked around my neighborhood, it was to not only tear those walls down, but to encircle me and to call me out as his, to make it known that I belong to him now. He was calling me out as his, and I didn't know that at the time. But the Father had showed me, and what that taught me was that in this walk of healing and this walk in this relationship with Daniel, things are layered, and the Father shows us, he peels those layers away as we learn more and as we walk more in obedience with him. And throughout our entire relationship, that's what's been happening. Layers have been peeled away, and we've been learning more and more about the Father and how he's been walking us through this relationship. So after that happened, that was May 30th that happened. July 4th, there was a retreat, our singles retreat in Canton, Texas, right outside Dallas. And some more things had happened with the Father. I had prayed one morning at the retreat, and he gave me the word surrender. And at the time, again, this goes back to being layered. At the time when he gave me that word surrender, I thought it had to do with Hebrew Hearts and some ministry work that we had been doing there. But I had since learned after that he gave me that word, that I was supposed to surrender to him and what he was going to be walking me through in my life that I hadn't known at the time. And so I had walked through, as I was walking through this healing, I'd learned to surrender to the Father and let him lead me and let him guide my steps. Like Daniel was saying, that I needed to let him walk me through, to take the steps that he had given me, that he had something planned for me I didn't know. And unless I surrendered to him and gave my life to him, I was never going to be able to learn what he had for me. So I surrendered. And after I had surrendered, that was in July 4th, the 4th weekend up in Canton. I went to Joy's house, a dear friend of mine, and I walked through healing and deliverance with her in the middle of August. That was life-changing. The whole story in itself with that. After that, we had the admin retreat, where just the admins in the Hebrew Hearts group had gone to North Carolina. That was, I wasn't even going to go to that, first of all. I was too damaged still. I was too broken. I was afraid to go because it was very one-on-one with a lot of, there was 4 other men there that were the admins that were there, and that terrified me. And I realized that I still had a lot of healing to do, and I was triggered big time, and I wasn't going to go. I ended up going, and within that retreat, learned to surrender some more and really stretch my limits. Took the mask on that I had still been hiding behind. I removed that and got out of my comfort zone, and again let the Father lead me. And I received a lot of healing during that time at the admin retreat in North Carolina. It was amazing, the work that the Father had done in my life during that time.
And going back to what Jamie said about encircling and claiming her for myself, when I was doing that, I didn't know I was claiming her for myself. This whole time of ministry, I have a heart of ministry. I have used past traumas in my life, and it has made me very empathetic, very caring, I feel what people feel. And so I see someone hurting and I want to minister, and I want nothing in return. I'm not expecting anything. There's no payback. It's just what I do. And I was doing this with other people as well. So this encircling around her block, the 8 times, this whole time when I'm just interceding for Jamie, none of this at the time did I see this as being for me. I had no claim. I had no expectation. There was no agenda. There was no desire. There was no attraction. It was just my heart ministering to another heart. And that was all it was. And then further along in our relationship, I had to ask myself, as these bonds were being made, was this a bond, or was this just doing what I do for people? And there was a point where I came to the realization that there were things that Jamie had for me. Though I'm a faithful believer, I never walk in a way of expecting God to do something for me. I am an obedient servant, and I obey with joy, not terrified. But it wasn't this where the Father really touches and intervenes in my life. And so I was starting to see through this whole development things that were happening. And after this retreat, we started a chat group just for those who attended the retreat. And there were things that we were asking each other questions that once we were done with the retreat, we went home and we were having dialogues about things. And there was a point where my heart was still kind of aching in this, I don't even know how to describe it. There was this bond with no name, there's no definition of what it was. And there was a point where I sent a text, and it was on the group so everybody saw it, but I just spill out my heart because that's what I do. And I told Jamie, I said, "You are my undoing," because I had not had feelings, callings, connections with a person so deep like this without having this sexual attraction, male-female attraction. That was not what initiated any of this. Going back to what I was said, I did not have an agenda. This was all the Father working in this, and this tie that bound us together just kept growing, and neither one of us understood it. I think Jamie, even during the retreat, she didn't have an attraction for me, and I didn't. We were ministering to each other, and I would pray for her, and I would hold her hand as I did with everybody in the group. She was just one of the other people in the group, but that bond was growing, and it was the Father's bond that was drawing us together, not our own bond. But the important thing to realize, like I was saying before, when we ordain everything in our lives, our own lives, we don't give the Father a chance to build those bonds. So we're going to a cookbook, we're going to make a pie, and we follow the recipe, and we like these ingredients and we don't like those ingredients, so we're making everything. And that's how many people in our groups, the Hebrew Hearts groups, are seeking relationships, because we have this recipe of what the right man is, this recipe of the right woman is, and it's so tightly defined that when can the Father build bonds?
Mm-hmm.
And we were yielded, not to each other, to the Father. And he made a bond. He created a bond.
In the spiritual. There was no physical. It wasn't physical at all. It was a heart and a soul connection that we had nothing to do with.
Right.
Nothing. The Father did it.
And we couldn't have. But because our hearts weren't focused on finding the right mate, our hearts were focused on ministering, then I look at it as like when King David wanted to build the temple, and the Father said, I account it to you as if you've done it because it was in your heart. Well, our hearts were wanting to serve each other, and that's all we were wanting. And he accounted it for more than even that and started building something that he was looking for. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah. I mean, when Daniel first walked around my neighborhood, that was my story. That was something that was for me. I thought at the time, it was always about my healing. That he had come and he had walked around for my healing. And one day we were chatting, and he mentioned that this was our story. And it was at that moment that I realized that him walking around my neighborhood, it still had to do with my healing. It had a lot to do with my healing. But again, layers. The Father showed me through Daniel speaking that, saying our story. I realized that this wasn't my story. This was our story. And he had just as much that he had gained by walking around my neighborhood than I did. So this wasn't only about me. It had become our story.
Right.
Yeah. That was a point in time for me to really understand more so about that, how the Father was with us.
Now, so we had met one time at this one retreat, and all the rest were this cursed long distance relationship. But part of that happened because we were open, we had servant hearts, and we were communicating mostly via text. So this is, in essence, an invitation for each one of you as you are in the groups. Communicate, talk to people. Don't pick someone out and say, that's the person for me, unless, of course, the Father does that and tells you that, by all means, because he's not following anybody's formula. And but just communicate with people, get to know people. And if you see something develop, look for his hand in it and let him move, let him be. And stop restricting him, stop holding the Father back.
Yep. Too many of us put him in a box.
Yes.
And we don't think that stories like ours can happen because we do that. It's rare. Yeah. This is rare. But it's because we surrendered to the Father and let him walk us through this. We didn't do this ourselves. We didn't create this. He did. And in order for that to happen, you have to surrender yourself to him wholly and completely, and let him write your story. He's the author. Let him do it.
Right.
Give him the pen.
Yes. That's a beautiful way to look at it. Yeah. Let him write your story. And this is no promise that your walk is going to be the same as ours. But I promise you, when you surrender to him, it will be his story. And that's really what you want most of all, is for your walk to be his story. We want to live lives where we don't get the credit. He does. Only he does. And if we're orchestrating everything, at the end, we're the only ones who get the credit. But if we are yielding, surrendering, then only he gets the credit and we get the blessings.
Right. Amen.
So I hope that helps. We will continue these. We don't know how often. We're probably going to talk about some of the roadblocks and triggers and difficult times we've had, because those do happen, and it's okay that those hard times can make you strong as well. So until next time, shalom.
So